10 of the biggest butter brands in America are not entirely honest with you, and the deception starts with a single number most people have never heard of: 80%. That is the legal floor. Under U.S. federal regulation, a product cannot be called butter unless it contains at least 80% milk fat. Not a target, not a suggestion, a floor. And here is what almost nobody realizes: standing in the dairy aisle, several of the greatest hits in that case, the tubs and sticks people have trusted for decades, don't even try to clear that bar anymore. They quietly stepped into a different legal category years ago, and the label was redesigned to make sure you'd never notice the difference. Some of the worst offenders aren't the cheap ones either. A few of the priciest tubs in that case are sitting there marketed as the health-conscious, premium, better-for-your-heart choice, while a food science professor has told a federal court, under oath, that the product is nearly indistinguishable from ordinary margarine. We're counting down 10 brands you should look at differently the next time you're standing in that aisle, from the least concerning to the one built entirely on a health story that doesn't hold up under its own ingredient panel. Then we're covering 3 that actually are what they claim to be. Every fact in this comes from the ingredient label, the Federal Register, or a real court filing. Let's get into it. Number 10. Challenge Butter. This is the one that doesn't lie to you outright, and that's exactly why it opens the list instead of closing it. Challenge is a California dairy brand, and its butter is real butter, made to sit right at the federal minimum, not below it, right at it. 80% milk fat, not a fraction more. There's nothing illegal about that, and nothing hidden about it either, but it's worth understanding what that number actually means for what's in your hand. The other 20% of a stick of butter is water and milk solids, and the closer a brand sits to that 80% line, the more of what you're buying is that other 20%. A butter built with a slightly higher fat content behaves differently in a pan, spreads differently from the fridge, and carries flavor differently through a finished dish. Challenge isn't cutting corners. It's simply positioned at the legal minimum instead of above it, and most shoppers assume real butter means the same thing no matter which stick they grab. It doesn't. That distinction becomes a lot more important a few names down this list once we start looking at products that don't even try to hit that 80% number at all. Number 9. Great value. Walmart's private label butter. The story here isn't a scandal, it's an absence. Walmart is one of the largest grocery retailers on earth, moving more butter through its stores than almost any company in the country, and yet Great Value doesn't publish farm-level sourcing, doesn't name a specific dairy cooperative behind the product, and doesn't differentiate its supply chain the way regional and specialty brands increasingly do. What you get is a private label butter manufactured under contract, packaged under the Great Value name, priced to be the default choice for tens of millions of households. That absence of information isn't unique to Walmart, it's standard for almost every private label butter in the country. But it's worth naming plainly, because private label works specifically by not telling you anything you'd have to think about: no farm name, no breed of cow, no feed program, just a price low enough that asking those questions never crosses your mind. The next brand on this list has the opposite problem. It tells you plenty, almost none of it is about the actual product inside the tub. Number 8. Breakstones, owned by Kraft Heinz. This one has genuine history behind it. Breakstones has been producing dairy in the northeastern United States since the 1880s, and its butter is, again, real butter, meeting the federal standard. There's no reformulation story here, no lawsuit, no legal gray area. What there is a brand riding almost entirely on the weight of its own age. 140 years on shelves creates a kind of trust that doesn't actually require the product to be exceptional, just familiar. Kraft Heinz doesn't publish detailed sourcing information for Breakstone's dairy supply the way boutique creameries do, which puts it in a similar position to Great Value, legally compliant, unremarkable, riding on brand recognition rather than transparency. Standard industrial dairy, wearing a heritage name, that combination, an old name doing the selling instead of the ingredient panel, is going to come up again and again as we move up this list, and it gets a lot more consequential once real money and real litigation get involved. Number 7. Land O'Lakes, and this is where the story gets more complicated, because Land O'Lakes is not one product. It's a farmer-owned cooperative, founded in 1921 by roughly 300 dairy farmers in Minnesota, and today it represents more than 1,000 farmer owners. Its straight stick butter, including the European-style line at 82% milk fat, is genuinely good butter from a genuinely cooperative-owned company. That's not the part worth flagging. The part worth flagging is what sits next to it on the same shelf under the same name. Land O'Lakes also sells a light butter with canola oil, and its ingredient panel looks nothing like the stick butter beside it. Water, butter, canola oil, buttermilk, food starch modified, tapioca maltodextrin, mono and diglycerides, PGPR, lactic acid, potassium sorbate and sodium benzoate as preservatives, natural flavor, xanthan gum, and beta-carotene for color. That's the company's own published label, word for word. A shopper who trusts the Land O'Lakes name because the stick butter is excellent can grab the tub next to it assuming the same standard applies. It doesn't. Same cooperative, same logo, two completely different products, and the label is the only thing separating one from the other. Number 6. Parquet, owned by Conagra Brands. Parquet was introduced by Kraft in 1937 and eventually landed with Conagra in 1998 when the company paid $400 million to acquire Parquet, Bluebonnet, and Fleischmann's from Nabisco in a single deal. 3 separate-looking brands, one purchase, one parent company running all 3. Parquet is built primarily from a vegetable oil blend of soybean, palm, and palm kernel oil, with mono and diglycerides used as emulsifiers, meaning it was never trying to be butter in the first place, and legally isn't marketed as butter. That part is honest. Where it gets murkier is the trans fat question. Conagra removed partially hydrogenated oils from Parquet, along with Bluebonnet and Fleischmann's, by 2015, in response to the FDA's ruling that year declaring partially hydrogenated oils no longer generally recognized as safe. That reformulation was real and it mattered, but mono and diglycerides, which remain in the formula, can still carry trace amounts of trans fat, and FDA rounding rules allow a product to list 0 grams of trans fat on the label as long as it stays under half a gram per serving. 0 on the label doesn't always mean 0 in the jar, and the next name on this list is Parquet's own sister brand, purchased in that same $400 million deal, with a number attached to it that's hard to believe is still legal. Number 5. Bluebonnet, also Conagra. Same acquisition, same $400 million, same 1998 deal that brought in Parquet and Fleischmann's. Bluebonnet launched in 1942 as a wartime butter substitute, built its identity on a jingle that ran for decades, and today sells a spread that, according to its own published composition, sits at 53% fat. Here's what that number actually means. Federal law requires at least 80% fat for something to be called butter. Margarine has the same 80% requirement. Bluebonnet, at 53%, doesn't meet the threshold for either category. It isn't butter, it legally isn't even margarine. It exists in a looser spread classification with essentially no fat content floor at all, built mostly around water and vegetable oil, wearing 80 years of brand nostalgia on the label to make you forget to ask what's actually inside. Same parent company as Parquet, same 2015 removal of partially hydrogenated oils, same emulsifier-driven formula, 2 brands, 1 acquisition, packaged to look like 2 different choices in the same aisle. This is the point where the pattern really starts to show. It isn't one bad brand. It's one company running the exact same playbook under multiple names, and Conagra isn't the only parent company doing it. Number 4. Smart Balance. This is the brand built almost entirely on a single health claim, and the claim needs to be looked at carefully because it's technically accurate and still misleading in the way it's presented. Smart Balance is not butter and not margarine. It's legally a buttery spread, made from roughly 64% vegetable oil depending on the variety, blended from palm, canola, and either olive or flaxseed oil, along with water. Its front label centerpiece is an omega-3 claim, 400 milligrams of ALA per serving, listed as 25% of the daily value. That number is real, and it's on the company's own published label. What isn't on the front of the tub is the distinction between ALA and the omega-3s most cardiovascular research actually focuses on, EPA and DHA, the forms found in fish oil. ALA is a plant-based omega-3, and the human body converts only a small fraction of it into EPA and DHA. The 400 milligrams printed in bold is real, but it isn't nutritionally equivalent to what most people picture when they see omega-3 on a spread they're choosing specifically for heart health. Smart Balance also carries a cholesterol support claim on the label that comes with an asterisk tying it to an overall low saturated fat diet and exercise, not to the spread by itself. Real numbers, technically accurate framing, and a front label doing more persuasive work than the fine print underneath it can fully support. Number 3. I can't believe it's not butter. Made by Unilever until its spreads division was sold off in 2018, now under Upfield. This brand generated one of the more genuinely strange food labeling lawsuits of the past decade, and it's worth walking through because the ending isn't what most people expect. The spray version of this product is labeled as 0 calories and 0 grams of fat per serving. Consumers filed a class action arguing that was misleading because a full 12-ounce bottle of the product actually contains around 1,160 calories and 124 grams of fat, and that the labeling exploited an artificially tiny single-spray serving size to make the nutrition panel read as effectively empty. The case went all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. In 2023, in a split 2-to-1 decision, the court sided with the company, ruling that under FDA regulations, a spray-type product is allowed to round down to 0 calories if a single spray contains under 5 calories, and that the plaintiff's complaint about real-world usage patterns wasn't a valid basis to override that classification. One judge dissented, calling the underlying logic ludicrous, writing that a bottle of flavored oil containing over 1,000 calories doesn't become calorie-free simply because it's dispensed through a pump instead of a lid. That dissent didn't win. The zero-calorie label is legal, upheld by a federal appellate court, and still describes a product that's roughly 40% vegetable oil once you look past the serving size math, legally compliant, structurally built to be misread. Number 2, and this is where the pattern from earlier in the list becomes impossible to ignore. Country Crock, also owned by Upfield, the same company behind I Can't Believe It's Not Butter. Two of the brands on this list, sitting on opposite ends of the fat content spectrum, coming out of the exact same corporate parent. Country Crock's plant butter line, sold with "made with olive oil" printed directly on the front of the tub, olive branches illustrated across the packaging, marketed specifically to shoppers looking for a plant-based, health-oriented alternative to dairy butter. Multiple federal class action lawsuits have been filed against Upfield over this exact product, one in New York in 2022, another in California in 2025, all alleging the same core problem. The ingredient list shows the product is built primarily from palm kernel, soybean, and canola oil, with olive oil appearing well down the list, present in a far smaller quantity than the front of package branding implies. In court filings connected to the 2022 case, Scott Rankin, chair of the Food Science Department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, stated that the product and standard margarine are, in his words, largely indistinguishable aside from the presence of olive oil and slight differences in fat and calorie content, and noted that the product is actually more calorie-dense than margarine because of its higher concentration of saturated fat. The product itself sits at roughly 79% fat, just under the 80% threshold required to even be called margarine. This is the brand chosen specifically by people trying to make the healthier plant-based swap, marketed with the exact ingredient that's supposed to prove it, and according to a food scientist's sworn testimony, delivering something functionally close to the product it was supposed to be an upgrade from. That's the betrayal that lands hardest, not because the numbers are the most extreme on this list, but because it's the brand that asked for your trust the most directly and had a food science professor tell a federal court on the record that the trust wasn't fully earned. Now that you know what to avoid, here's what actually holds up under the same standard. Best option number 3, Land O'Lakes European-style butter, and yes, this is the same cooperative that landed on the avoid list a few names back. That's not a contradiction, it's the whole point. The light butter with canola oil, loaded with modified starch and preservatives, and the European-style stick butter, sitting a few inches away in the same dairy case, are made by the same farmer-owned cooperative, but held to completely different formulations. The European-style line sits at 82% milk fat, above the federal minimum, with an ingredient list that's simply cream and salt, no stabilizers, no gums, no emulsifiers. The lesson from this brand isn't avoid the company, it's read the specific product, because one shelf can hold both the best and the most compromised version of the exact same name. Best option number 2, Plugra. This one was built for professional kitchens, not for a marketing department. Plugra sits at 82% milk fat, meeting the European-style butter standard, and in 2009, the American Culinary Federation gave it their official seal of approval, a recognition built around professional cooking performance rather than a health claim aimed at grocery shoppers. It's a butter designed to behave predictably in pastry work, where higher fat and lower moisture actually change how dough laminates and how sauces hold together. It doesn't carry an omega-3 claim, doesn't have a lawsuit attached to its name, and doesn't need a front label health story, because the entire case for it is built into what professional kitchens have already decided about how it performs. Best option number 1, Kerrygold, produced by Ornua, the Irish agricultural cooperative that represents dairy farmers and processors across Ireland. Kerrygold's unsalted butter comes in at 82% milk fat, its salted version at 80%, both above or at the same floor every other brand on this list had to clear, and its cows graze outdoors on Irish pasture for the large majority of the year under Ireland's certified grass-fed dairy standard, which requires an average diet of roughly 95% grass. That grass-fed diet is also the reason for the butter's distinctive deep yellow color. Grass carries significantly more beta-carotene than grain feed, and that pigment transfers directly into the milk and then the butter, with no added coloring required. Ornua's supply chain confirms the milk comes from cows that are not treated with HRBST, the synthetic growth hormone still legal for use in some American dairy operations. The full ingredient list on the unsalted version is exactly what you'd expect from a product with nothing to hide: pasteurized cream, skimmed milk, and cultures, no stabilizers, no emulsifiers. No health claim printed in bold, trying to convince you of something the ingredient panel can't back up on its own. It's simply the highest fat content, the most transparent sourcing standard, and the shortest ingredient list of anything covered in this entire investigation, avoid list included. Here's what all 10 avoid entries actually have in common, and it isn't a single villain or a single dangerous chemical. It's a legal category most people never learn to look for. Butter has a federal floor of 80% milk fat. Margarine has the exact same floor. Everything below that line gets folded into a much looser spread category, with no meaningful fat content requirement at all, and spread packaging is specifically where the additive lists get longer, the ownership gets murkier, and the front label health claims get louder. 3 brands on this list, Parquet, Bluebonnet, and Fleischmann's, came from a single $400 million acquisition. 2 more, Country Crock and I Can't Believe It's Not Butter, sit on opposite shelves of the same store while sharing the exact same corporate parent. None of that is illegal. All of it is designed so you never have to notice it while the cart is moving. So here's the one habit that replaces all of this research. Flip the package over before it goes in the cart, and look for one word first: butter, margarine, or spread. If it says spread, there's no fat content floor behind that word at all, and everything else on the label deserves a second look. If you found a brand on this list sitting in your own refrigerator right now, you know exactly what to check for next time. And if this changed how you'll read that label, sharing it with someone who buys the same tub out of habit every week is genuinely the most useful thing you can do with it.